I never thought I would be sharing this story, but here I am. 7 years ago, I was a successful software engineer in Seattle, deeply in love with my wife Audrey. On our wedding day, I believed we would build a lifetime of happiness together. Everything seemed perfect at first: the dream home, our thriving careers, and our passionate connection. After our second anniversary, though, something shifted. The woman I married began to change, and soon came the first ultimatum that would ultimately reshape my life forever. Before I dive into my story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you have ever had to make a difficult choice to reclaim your dignity. The story of Audrey and me began on a rainy Seattle evening at my college friend Thomas's housewarming party. I was 32, recently promoted at my software development job with one of the major tech companies downtown. Audrey stood by the bookshelf, her dark hair falling in waves past her shoulders, discussing 19th century literature with such passion that I found myself drawn into her orbit without even realizing it. "You actually read all of Dostoevsky?" I asked, genuinely impressed. She turned to me with those piercing blue eyes. "Gordon, right, Thomas mentioned you." And, yes, the Brothers Karamazov changed my perspective on morality. Her smile lit something inside me I had not felt in years. We talked until 3 in the morning, long after other guests had left. Our connection was immediate and electric. She was brilliant, a marketing executive for a luxury brand, cultured, ambitious, and disarmingly funny. By the end of that night, I knew something significant had begun. Our courtship was a whirlwind. We hiked Mount Rainier under a canopy of stars, explored hidden bookstores in Portland, where I bought her first editions of her favorite classics, and spent weekends cooking elaborate meals in my apartment. 4 months in, I took her to Cannon Beach, where, with the Pacific waves crashing behind us, I asked her to move in with me. 6 months after that, I proposed at Chateau Suite, Michelle Winery, surrounded by autumn foliage and the scent of harvested grapes. Our wedding in the Olympic National Forest was everything we dreamed. 150 guests' vows we wrote ourselves, and Audrey in a vintage lace dress that made her look otherworldly. My father whispered, "You found a remarkable woman," as we watched her dance with her elderly grandfather. I nodded, overcome with emotion and certainty. The first year of our marriage was blissful. We purchased a craftsman home in the Ravenna neighborhood, spent weekends renovating it together, and supported each other through career milestones. I earned a substantial promotion leading a development team, while Audrey landed a prestigious role at a national marketing agency. We celebrated with champagne on our rooftop deck, planning our future with excited whispers under the stars. We had our routines: Sunday farmers markets alternating who chose Friday night activities, and respecting each other's need for occasional solitude. Audrey painted in her home studio. I tinkered with vintage motorcycles in the garage. We maintained our own friendships and interests while building a life together. Looking back, there were signs I should have noticed. At Thomas's 40th birthday, Audrey firmly redirected our conversation when I started sharing stories from our college days. "Gordon tends to exaggerate," she said, with a laugh that carried an edge. "Let me tell you what actually happened." My friends exchanged glances, but I brushed it off as harmless. Then came our vacation to Maui. I had arranged a surprise sunset sailing cruise, but Audrey was upset I had not consulted her first. "I get seasick, Gordon. You would know that if you actually paid attention." She was right. She had mentioned it once, months earlier. I apologized profusely, canceled the cruise, and spent the rest of the trip trying to make it up to her. By our return flight, things seemed patched up, and I convinced myself every marriage had adjustment periods. I believed we were learning to navigate marriage together. I had no idea what was actually beginning. The transformation was so gradual I barely noticed it happening. Around our second anniversary, subtle shifts in Audrey's behavior became more pronounced. The woman who had once loved my spontaneity now criticized it as immature and inconsiderate. My comfortable clothing became embarrassing my circle of friends beneath us, and my parents, too, involved in our lives. It started with small comments during dinner with friends. "Gordon means well, but he struggles with social cues," sometimes she would say with a sympathetic smile. Or, "I have to manage our social calendar, or we would never see anyone worthwhile." I laughed along, assuming these were playful jabs, rather than the systematic undermining they actually were. The first time Audrey used physical intimacy as leverage happened after I mentioned visiting my parents for their 40th anniversary. She had already declined to join, citing work commitments. "You went last month," she said, not looking up from her laptop. "I think 2 visits in 6 weeks is excessive." "But it is their anniversary," I replied. "My sister is flying in from Austin. Everyone will be there. If you want to prioritize them over quality time with your wife, that is your choice." Her tone was ice. "Just know there are consequences to choosing them over me." That night, when I reached for her, she turned away. "I am not feeling connected to you right now. Maybe if you showed me I was your priority, that would change." I canceled the trip, telling my family I had an unexpected work emergency. The reconciliation that followed seemed to justify my choice. Audrey was affectionate, attentive, and passionate. I told myself this was normal marital compromise, but the pattern was established. Disagreements about finances, socializing, even what movies we watched increasingly ended, with Audrey withdrawing physically, until I conceded. I attempted conversations about this pattern multiple times. "You are imagining things," she would say. "I just do not feel close when we are fighting. That is normal." "Are you saying I should be intimate when I do not feel like it?" Put that way, I felt ashamed for bringing it up. Was I pressuring her? The thought made me sick. So I stopped mentioning it, and instead focused on avoiding conflict altogether. My wardrobe gradually transformed to meet her standards. Friendships faded as I declined invitations to poker nights and football games. I spoke to my parents once weekly, instead of our previous daily calls. When my best friend James got married, Audrey manufactured an argument the morning of the wedding. I attended alone, leaving early, while she texted demands for my return. 6 months into our 3rd year of marriage, Audrey presented me with a document she called Relationship Expectations. 27 pages outlining acceptable behaviors, conversation topics, and spending limits. My section contained 4 times as many restrictions as hers. I stared at it speechless as she explained this would reduce conflicts and create more harmony. Around this time, I began seeing Dr. Matthews secretly during lunch breaks. I could not articulate exactly what was wrong, only that I felt constantly anxious walking on eggshells in my own home. He listened patiently, asking questions that slowly helped me recognize the manipulation I was experiencing. Meanwhile, Audrey assumed control of our finances to reduce your stress, honey. My substantial income went into joint accounts she managed, while she maintained a separate account I had no access to. When I needed new equipment for work, I had to justify the expense to her. The sports car I had loved since college was sold, because we need to be more practical now. I received an allowance for lunches and personal items. My weight dropped 20 pounds. Colleagues asked if I was ill. I grew a beard because Audrey said my face looked better covered, and I believed her. The man in my mirror became a stranger, hunched uncertain, always scanning for potential missteps. Our 4th anniversary dinner became the breaking point. At an upscale restaurant downtown, surrounded by other couples, Audrey loudly corrected my wine selection, explained to the sommelier that my husband knows nothing about fine dining, and proceeded to order for me despite my stated preferences. When I quietly objected, she shot me a warning look that silenced me immediately. Our server noticed his eyes reflecting pity that burned through me like acid. I realized in that moment I had become someone I no longer recognized or respected. The drive home from our anniversary dinner was silent. Inside our house, the argument erupted with volcanic force. For the first time in years, I did not immediately back down. "You humiliated me tonight," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "You have been controlling every aspect of my life, and I have let you. That ends now." Audrey's expression shifted from shock to cold fury. "You want to talk about humiliation? Try being married to someone who embarrasses you constantly. I have worked so hard to help you become someone respectable, by cutting me off from everyone who cared about me, by dictating what I wear, what I say, even what I think." She crossed her arms, her wedding ring catching the light. "I will not apologize for having standards. If you want a successful marriage, you need to accept my guidance." The argument escalated for hours. Finally, around 3 in the morning, she delivered the ultimatum that would ultimately free me, though I could not see it then. This is very simple, Gordon. You have two choices. You can obey me and have a wife who fulfills all your needs, or you can continue this childish rebellion and sleep alone indefinitely. Your choice. I stared at her suddenly, seeing with perfect clarity the trap I had been living in. The beautiful, brilliant woman I fell in love with was now revealing herself fully, not as a partner, but as an owner. I need time to think. I said, my voice hollow. Do not take too long. My patience has limits. That night on our guest room sofa marked the beginning of the longest week of my life. I slept perhaps 2 hours each night, my mind racing through years of manipulation I had accepted as love. During the day, I functioned on autopilot at work, avoiding conversations, staring blankly at code that once energized me. On Thursday, my friend Jake, who I had barely seen in months, spotted me at a downtown coffee shop during lunch. His eyes widened at my appearance. Jesus, Gordon, you look like hell. Are you sick? Something in his genuine concern cracked my carefully constructed facade. Before I could stop myself, the whole story came pouring out. The control, the manipulation, the ultimatum. Jake listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly concerned. That is not a marriage, man. That is prison, he said finally. Have you ever looked up emotional abuse? That night after Audrey went to sleep, I researched emotional and psychological abuse. Each article, each checklist, each survivor story reflected my reality with such accuracy I felt physically ill. One phrase kept appearing: withholding affection or intimacy as punishment is a common control tactic in abusive relationships. The next morning, I confronted Audrey with my research. I think we need counseling. What is happening between us is not healthy. Her reaction was immediate and defensive. So now I am abusive because I will not sleep with someone who disrespects me. You are the one with issues, Gordon. Maybe you should see a therapist for your paranoia. I have been seeing one for months. The fury that followed was apocalyptic. She threw a coffee mug that shattered against the wall inches from my head. You have been talking to someone behind my back about our private life. How dare you? Over the next few days, the situation deteriorated rapidly. I returned home from work to find she had thrown out my collection of vintage science fiction novels, childish clutter. My motorcycle parts disappeared from the garage, eyesores. She contacted my team lead to express concerns about my mental health potentially jeopardizing my position. Quietly, I consulted with attorney Sarah Goldstein, documenting everything. I began transferring small amounts from our joint account to a new private one, knowing I would need resources to escape. 2 weeks after the ultimatum, my mother had a health scare. Elevated cardiac enzymes that required overnight hospital observation. When I told Audrey I needed to visit her, the response was immediate. Your mother uses health concerns for attention. If you go, do not expect to be welcomed back into our bedroom. Ever. I went, anyway. My mother was fine, thankfully, but Audrey made good on her threat. I returned to find the bedroom door locked, my remaining clothes piled in the hallway. That night, lying again on the too small sofa, I reached my breaking point. The man I had become was unrecognizable, fearful, isolated, a shadow, existing only to please someone who could never be pleased. I was done. I woke up the next morning with a clarity I had not felt in years. The perpetual fog of anxiety that had become my normal state had lifted, replaced by a calm, steady resolve. I knew exactly what I needed to do. While Audrey slept, I gathered essential documents, birth certificate, passport, financial records, and secured them in a small, safe deposit box at a bank she did not use. I transferred half our savings to my new account, documented with meticulous screenshots, the date and amounts, to demonstrate fairness during potential divorce proceedings. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, and spent the day viewing apartments. By afternoon, I had signed a lease on a small one-bedroom in Capitol Hill, Nothing fancy, but clean, modern, and most importantly, mine. I paid 2 months' rent up front from my new account. When Audrey returned from work, I was sitting calmly at our kitchen table, a single suitcase beside me. "What is this?" she demanded, eyes darting between me and the luggage. "I am leaving," I said simply. "I have thought about your ultimatum, and I have made my decision. You can keep it forever. I choose myself." Her expression cycled rapidly through disbelief, anger, and, most surprisingly, fear. The script had changed, and for once she was not controlling the narrative. "You cannot be serious," she said, voice rising. "Where would you even go? You have nothing without me. I have an apartment. I have my job. I have my self-respect." My voice remained steady, surprising, even me. "The divorce papers will be delivered tomorrow." What followed was the most predictable part of that day. First came rage, accusations, insults, character assassinations, designed to make me doubt my decision. When those failed to penetrate my newfound resolve, she switched tactics. "Baby, we can work on this," she said, suddenly softening, reaching for my hand. "I just want us to be the best we can be. Maybe I pushed too hard because I love you so much. A week earlier, this would have worked." I would have melted with relief at this apparent reprieve, this glimpse of the woman I had fallen in love with. But I now recognized it as just another manipulation. The love-bombing phase my therapist had warned would come if I ever tried to leave. When that failed, she collapsed into tears. "How can you do this to me? After everything I have sacrificed for you, everyone will think I failed as a wife." "I am not doing this to you," I replied, standing and picking up my suitcase. "I am doing this for me." I walked out the door to her screams that I would regret this, that I would come crawling back, that no one would ever love me like she did. I sincerely hoped that last part was true. The next 6 months were challenging but transformative. Audrey fought the divorce, viciously spreading rumors among our social circle that I had cheated, had a mental breakdown, was abusive. Some believed her, those who only knew the carefully curated version of our marriage she had presented. But others, like Jake and Thomas, stood firmly beside me. My small apartment became a sanctuary. I bought furniture I actually liked, comfortable, slightly mismatched pieces that prioritized comfort over aesthetic perfection. I hung art that spoke to me rather than matched the decor. I rescued a 3-legged cat from the shelter and named him Edison. Most importantly, I reconnected with myself. Weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Matthews continued helping me untangle the psychological damage of years of manipulation. I joined a support group for survivors of emotional abuse, finding strength in the stories of others who had escaped similar situations. Slowly, I rebuilt relationships with friends and family. My sister flew in from Austin for a week, filling my apartment with laughter I had not heard in years. My parents visited monthly, my mother bringing home cooked meals, my father helping install new lighting fixtures in my living room. I rediscovered old passions, playing guitar, building custom computers, hiking the trails around Mount Rainier. I found a vintage Triumph motorcycle similar to the one Audrey had made me sell, and spent weekends restoring it piece by piece. The divorce finalized 11 months after I left. Audrey fought for everything: the house, cars, even items that held sentimental value only to me. In the end, her vindictiveness worked against her. The judge, seeing her behavior in court, awarded me more than my lawyer had initially thought possible. That chapter of my life was finally officially closed. I was 37 years old, starting over, and for the first time in years, genuinely happy. 1 year after walking out of my marriage, life had found a new rhythm. I had been promoted to lead architect at my company, recognition for work I was once again passionate about. My apartment, once a sparse refuge, had become a true home reflecting my personality. Most weekends found me outdoors, rediscovering the natural beauty of the Pacific Northwest that had once been such a central part of my identity. The most unexpected change came through volunteering. My therapist had suggested giving back might aid my healing process, so I began teaching coding basics at a community center downtown. That is where I met Tanya. She ran the center's adult education program, a former teacher with a laugh that filled the room, and a calm, centered presence that immediately put everyone at ease. Unlike the calculated elegance Audrey had cultivated, Tanya wore minimal makeup, practical clothes, and kept her curly hair in a perpetually messy bun. She radiated authenticity. Our first conversation happened after a class when she approached me about expanding the program. "Your students love you," she said directly. "We have a waiting list now. Would you consider adding another session?" I was struck by how she framed the request, not as an expectation or demand, but as a genuine question she was prepared to hear no to. I agreed to think about it, and she thanked me with no pressure for an immediate answer. Over the following months, Tanya and I developed a professional friendship based on mutual respect. We discussed curriculum, shared teaching strategies, and occasionally grabbed coffee after classes. I found myself looking forward to these conversations. Her insightful observations, her passion for education, her ability to see humor in everyday situations. "You know what I find fascinating about coding," she said one afternoon over lattes? "The balance between structure and creativity. Like jazz music, there are rules but endless possibility within them." It was such a perfect observation that I found myself thinking about it for days afterward. 6 months into our friendship, Tanya invited me to a community theater production she was involved with. "No pressure," she added immediately. "I completely understand if it is not your thing." I went and watched her perform a supporting role with such genuine joy that it was impossible not to be charmed. Afterward, over dinner, our conversation deepened beyond work into childhood memories, favorite books, life philosophies. I was married before I told her, testing the waters of vulnerability. It ended badly. "Mine too," she said simply. 3 years with someone who made me feel I was never quite good enough. That moment of shared understanding shifted something between us. Neither of us pushed for details, respecting each other's boundaries, but acknowledging this common experience created a deeper connection. Our relationship evolved naturally, without pressure or agenda. Weekend hikes became dinner at new restaurants, which became movie nights at her cozy apartment filled with plants and books. When she first reached for my hand during a walk along Alki Beach, it felt both surprising and inevitable. Still, I moved cautiously, hyper-aware of patterns from my past. The first time we disagreed about a documentary's political perspective, I tensed, waiting for the manipulation to begin. Instead, Tanya listened to my viewpoint, offered hers, and then said something that nearly brought me to tears. "We do not have to agree on everything. I like hearing how you think, even when it is different from my perspective." That night, I told Dr. Matthews about the interaction. "That is what healthy communication looks like," he confirmed. "Notice the difference between disagreement and control." As our relationship deepened, I marveled at the contrast with my marriage. Tanya never criticized my clothes, my friends, or my interests. She asked questions about my motorcycle restoration because she genuinely wanted to understand what I loved about it. When I mentioned weekend plans with Jake, she responded with, "That sounds fun. Tell him hi from me," rather than making me justify time away from her. Most striking was how we made decisions together. Planning our first weekend trip to Portland involved actual discussion, preferences considered equally, compromises made mutually, and no scorekeeping afterward. When I suggested an activity she did not enjoy, there was no punishment or withdrawal, just honest communication and alternative suggestions. 6 months into dating Tanya, I realized the profound difference between my past and present. With Audrey, I had walked on eggshells, constantly monitoring her reactions, adjusting myself to avoid her displeasure. With Tanya, I could breathe freely, be imperfect, disagree without fear of consequences. The lessons I learned through that painful chapter of my life have become invaluable wisdom. I now recognize that love should expand your world, not shrink it. That respect is non-negotiable. That healthy relationships energize rather than deplete. Most importantly, that your worth is not determined by someone else's assessment. Today, as Tanya and I plan a summer road trip down the California coast, I am grateful for the difficult journey that led me here. The ultimatum that once devastated me ultimately freed me to find what genuine partnership feels like. I learned that sometimes losing what you thought you needed opens the door to finding what you truly deserve. If you are in a relationship where your dignity is the price of admission, know that there is another way to live. The first step is the hardest, but I promise it gets better. Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else find their courage. Give this video a like if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories and share with someone who might need to hear this message today. Thank you for listening, and remember, you deserve to be loved without having to disappear.